Imagine, if you will, a portal where ancient mythology awakens and forgotten stories are told. As you listen, drift beyond the dimensions of what you know and explore the metaphysical bounds of imagination. Subscribe if you dare, as we uncover the mysterious and forbidden. Because in this maze of myths, each twist and turn brings you closer to the unknown. Now enter the Myth Lab.
Beneath the starry night sky, the peaceful, ancient, sub-Saharan village of Kuro lay nestled amongst the acacia trees, blissfully unaware of the impending horror about to descend upon them. The normally tranquil air was shredded by savage laughter and the clattering of overturned pottery through the narrow dirt roads. The unruly hoots and hollers of marauders echoed through the village as they clambered their way between huts, their torches scattering shadows that leapt and danced from their foul-mouthed heckles. They were a low-level gang of thieves and bandits, unaware of the ancient treasures guarded by the mysterious forces tasked with protecting Kuro. To the thieves, this remote village on the edge of the savanna was merely a target, ripe for pillaging. The villagers awoke in alarm to the stench of ale and torch smoke. Cries of panic arose into the night. Their torches cast flickering shadows against the adobe walls, illuminating their wild eyes and bared teeth. They were violently after the goods that most thriving rural villages possessed: fragrant oils, rich silks, exotic spices. They kicked down doors, overturning pots and baskets, finding nothing of pillageable value. Their frustration mounted and they dragged the villagers into the streets, demanding to know where the valuables were hidden. A sinister edge entered their tone as their knives and short spears swung freely. This raid was soon to turn violent. Mothers huddled clutching their children to their breasts while fathers reached for their rusted sickles and farming hoes. Poor defense against the invaders' wicked blades. The marauders grew bold as tempers flared, clutching their weapons with unholy intentions. A village elder cowered inside his home, his feeble hands trembling on an old spear that hadn't seen battle for decades. Terror held the innocent inhabitants hostage as they prayed for deliverance. Then, in an effort towards gaining peace, out walked a small, barefooted merchant man who had seen enough. He wore simple muslin trousers and a worn-out tunic that had seen better days. He was barely noticeable compared to the burly marauders, yet he was clearly unafraid. To them he spoke calmly. "I urge you to leave this place. The laughing shadows protect these lands, and they do unspeakable things to intruders." His unassertive voice echoed through the silence. His tone was not one of threats or challenge, but a sincere warning. His hands were small and empty, a stark contrast to the weapons and flames held by those before him. A prideful laughter split the night, and suddenly, one of the members of the drunk gang lurched forward, slashing his knife through the air, holding it to the crook of the merchant's neck, just closely enough to draw a single drip of blood. He held it there as he hissed defiantly at the merchant. "You think we fear old tales, fool?" The merchant's heart privately raced, yet his voice was steady as it continued. "No one is afraid of me, but step carefully, or their wrath will be your undoing." Slowly the marauder rested his blade, stood straight up, all the while staring at the wiry little man in his eyes. He pinned his back, then swiftly moved, lifting his strongest leg and kicking the man in the chest towards the ground with what looked like the power of a horse. The callous gang of men set ablaze with laughter as he struggled, dirty and trying to catch his breath while gasping, whimpering on the floor. The villagers' fears had come to a head. They gasped and watched from the corners of their windows, wide-eyed with terror, as the marauders took a young girl into the middle of the street. It was then that a point between light and darkness split open, unveiling a towering figure. His silhouette bled into the night as he emerged from the shadows, an abnormally tall, slinky frame, lean and filled with muscles. He stood at the edge of the village square, his penetrating gaze taking in the scene with an unreadable calmness. A quiet contempt radiated from him. The laughter of the thieves began to die down as the realization slowly dawned upon the now stunned villagers. It was Tunde, the feared and respected leader of the Laughing Shadows, and he had arrived to restore order to the village. His presence was marked by a thick and eerie silence that seemed to have swallowed the whole village. Fear and awe crept into those who dared to meet his gaze. One of the marauders glanced from the corner of his eye that only now some of the villagers began to scurry back into their homes. The band of thieves fell silent as they watched him approach, their obnoxious laughter fading into a hushed anticipation. Their leader, a thick-necked, brutal man with a scar from his jaw to his neck, turned to face Tunde. His gaze met him with a cold emptiness, void of warmth, and looking at the man as though he saw nothing. This was an unspoken challenge in the air between them. Slowly, Tunde moved closer still until he was within arm's reach of the lead marauder. He was outsized, but his mere presence was heavier than any weapon. A tense silence filled the space around them as Tunde dragged out every moment before addressing him. Finally, cutting through the silence with the voice of a slow, warm knife. Returning home should spark delight. Tunde's words rolled over the still village like a thunder, rumbling in the distant horizon. This leaves no place for terror to bite. The goon didn't say a word. Just as quickly as his lip curled, he lunged at Tunde with a jagged blade gleaming wickedly in his hand. Without breaking a stride, Tunde caught his arm mid-swing. The complexity of his movement was terrifying. It was a blend of grace and contained violence. He twisted and then snapped, and in an instant, the marauder dropped to his knees, struggling for air, before a single, pitiful cry escaped him, reverberating off nearby walls dense with the last shreds of his dignity. His weapon now slapping up dust from the ground as he groaned resentfully, attempting to regain himself. Tunde had inverted his elbow with one movement and twisted his hand in the opposite direction with another. Tunde did this with a sinister brutality that said that he was nowhere near finished. The other goons walked forward and began to surround him, ready to continue the fight, as one twirled a machete from one side to the other in an artfully displayed threat. Another lit a gin-soaked rag hanging from within a drunken bottle. This is when things got disturbing. From the edge of the village square, two more shadowy figures of the Laughing Shadows clan eerily detached themselves from the darkness. One was slender, and his entrance was as silent as a predator stalking its prey, his eyes and growing smile gleaming with the mischief that signaled his deadly intentions. Kofi had arrived. The other had a hulking figure, muscles hardened to stone from years of ruthless combat training bouldered from under his skin. He was called Uzoma. Their entrance was so swift that it went unnoticed by most, and it was frightening for those who did see. The flickering fire from torches etched out the cruel smile painted on Kofi's face as he watched the drama unfold. His eyes were dangerously empty, showcasing his dark amusement at the foolish marauders surrounding their leader. Uzoma stalked forward with an animalistic grace that was uncanny for a creature of his size. That alone evoked a primal fear from those who saw him, passing silently, murderously, across the village grounds. A moment of confusion even swept over the gang of marauders as Uzoma soundlessly made his way through the crowd. Those who were not paying attention would have missed it. As Uzoma silently reached their peripheral vision, he was too close for them to get any type of good attack on, so fear struck them, and they froze, choosing to allow his presence as he walked into the center of the circle, standing next to Tunde. But this only happened because the marauders who he passed by would have rather run than challenge the beast. The thinnest of the clan of guardians, Kofi, began rotating around the edge of the circle. As he did so, he cackled, his laugh echoing through the desolate space that hung with a heavy dread. "It seems you've started without me," he said. His voice was like a velvet laying atop a spiked steel mace. His words dripped with malice and dark amusement. The marauders grew equally angry and unsettled at the joy the cackling guardian seemed to take in the spectacle unraveling before them. Uzoma, on the other hand, avoided eye contact with everyone, focusing instead on his abnormally sharp nails, grooming them as if preparing for battle. Tunde's deep voice boomed across the square like a fierce wind as he declared to the thieves, "You men laugh like jackals. I hate jackals. So tonight, you will cower before the hyenas." The air hung heavy with tension, like a predator poised for its deadly pounce. For a moment, laid a cloak of uneasy silence. Anticipation danced on every breath drawn and exhaled. Meanwhile, each of Kofi's cackles made his body grow tense. The faces of the thieves that were closest to him began to twist in fear, their pulses rising, and they began to smell of fear as they waited for the most inevitable violence that they had ever faced to begin. Temperatures rose to a feverish high, and it was then that Kofi's tense body let out a ferocious, uncanny laughter and ripped through the silence. Strange, deranged, and with all the tonality of several dark voices at once. It echoed across the empty square, sending chills down everyone's spine. It was not just laughter. It was an ancient call that was much more lurking hyena than it was human. The marauders readied their weapons, knowing that danger was approaching. But as they looked around in terror, they saw more sets of eyes joining the chilling chorus from the empty darkness. The haunting sounds blared with supernatural power. Its spell coursed through Uzoma and Tunde's veins like a searing wildfire as their muscles twitched and bones crackled from the middle of the circle, leaving all to bear witness of this ancient force pulling at their very humanity. The call reached a violent, deafening pitch as the men's bodies were set ablaze with an unspeakable magic. They morphed, discolored, and shed as they became something entirely different. Their human appearances melting away as bones rearranged into terrifying forms. Tunde's face now contorting into a sinister long-toothed snout. Using a voice that seemed to come from another realm, he addressed the poor thieves. And with the last 3 words any remaining members of their gang would ever hear, he said,
"Welcome to Kuro.